a novelist, a short story writer, and a screenwriter who wrote the screenplay for a Nigerian TV series called The Calabash. In 2014, she was chosen as one of the sub-Saharan Africa's most promising writer under the age of 40. And in 2016, she was a resident at the University of Iowa's International Writing Program. And her writing has appeared in Catapult, the New York Times, and the Rumpus. So welcome, Ukamaka. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rifat and Jim. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me today. So this is my book, Ogadinma. It's my second novel. A small story about this book. It's a tribute to my mother's generation. What gave birth to this book was a conversation I was having with a group of friends online after I had seen a tweet by a Nigerian man who said something like, "Oh, our mother's generation, we are more, they are our mother's generation that were more, they persevered in marriage, that they weren't leaving their husbands, and the young women of these days, that they are impatient," that sort of thing. So it made me think a lot about the stories I had heard of my mother and my aunts who I grew up with, and also the stories of the women in my community, where we ascribe so much value to marriage, which should be a good thing. While for some of my mother's generation, early marriage worked well for them, but for others it was quite disastrous. So this book is sort of my tribute to my mother's generation, to document their journey. It chronicles a girl's journey. She was married when she was a teenager, and her journey through that violent marriage and having to leave and to become independent, to become financially independent. So I'll read from the first chapter of Ogadinma, and then I'll do something unusual. I will skip, after I'm done reading from the first chapter, I will skip a bit and I will read a narrative poem I wrote in 2019, which was published in Rattle magazine. Sorry about that. So the narrative poem was published in 2019. It's called Slot. It's essentially me responding to this, my mother's generation. It's the women of my own generation responding to my mother's generation, what they could do, and how the efforts of my mother's generation, their fights, their struggles, how it paved way for women like me to be able to be free to tell the kind of stories we want to tell, to be wild on the page, to be disruptive, to be selfish. How it was possible for us to be this expressive because my mother's generation had to go through this. So after I'm done reading from that poem, which is a response to this, then I will continue from a different chapter of Ogadinma. So 1, it was the early 80s, around the time a group of senior army officers overthrew the democratically elected government, when Austrian lace and ashoke were trendy and church services were fashion shows, an endless, shameless carnival of women in colorful blouses blended with expensive ichafu, which they tied in layers and pleats until the scarves were piled atop their heads like large plants, obstructing the view of everyone seated behind them. Everyone looked forward to Sundays, to going to church. Those who could not afford these processions snuck in very early for the children's service, because that was the graceful thing to do, to worship with the children in their simple clothes of cheap blouses over Nigerian wask, and okrika shoes whose heels had worn out and made koi 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 sounds on the tiled floor. It was on a Monday, after one of those Sundays, that Ogadinma walked into Barrister Chima's office for the first time. The room was empty. The fan whirled, scattering the papers on the cluttered desk. They floated to the floor, slid under the table, under the chair, by the door, and by her feet. She wondered if it would be awkward to walk in uninvited and pick them up. She knocked again, louder this time. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing. There was a click of heels. A girl emerged from the connecting door, her blue skirt so short she would not be comfortable if she were to bend over to get the papers. The name tag pinned to her white blouse said she was Amara. "What do you want?" she asked, her gaze piercing. "Your papers," Ogadinma pointed at the floor, but Amara wrinkled her nose, ignoring the scattered sheets, arching an eyebrow. "I am looking for Barrister Chima," Ogadinma said, bringing out the business card her father gave her, holding it up for Amara to see. "Come in," Amara said, waving her into the waiting room. And only after Ogadinma had gone in did Amara crouch carefully, not bend, because she could never bend without exposing her underwear to pick up the scattered papers. When her father described the address, Ogadinma had expected a proper workplace, or at least a hall split into cubicles. She had never been in a barrister's office and so did not know what the place would look like. But this was anything but an office. It was a typical 2 or 3 bedroom flat, the same model the houses around the area replicated. Without being told, she knew that the waiting room was originally designed to be a parlor, that the connecting door led to the Barrister Chima's office, which most likely had a master toilet. A small TV, half the size of her family's Philips black and white TV, was locked away in a metal cage knocked into the wall. She resisted the urge to laugh, because who on God's earth would want anything to do with that toy? Amara returned but headed straight for the barrister's office. "Barrister Chima will see you after he's done attending to the client inside," she said, and when she reemerged, an exaggerated air of importance about her. Ogadinma began to say "thank you," but Amara was already leaving. She looked no more than 17 or 18, perhaps a secondary school leaver like Ogadinma, who was passing time as a receptionist while waiting for a university admission letter. A short, bespectacled man walked in and took the seat opposite. Ogadinma greeted him, but the man did not respond. Soon, other visitors arrived, some wearing long faces, others tapping their feet impatiently after a few minutes. Ogadinma wondered what cases they were battling, or if they had also come to seek Barrister Chima's help with things like getting an admission into a university. She opened her bag and brought out her JAMB result, 240, good enough to get her an admission into the state university. But her father wanted her to study in the East, so she had chosen the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. Nsukka was a place they barely knew. Plus, often, the number of students that passed the exam exceeded the capacity a school could admit. So it was customary to go through people who knew powerful staff in the university, why they needed Barrister Chima's help. She folded the test result into her handbag. The room had filled to bursting. Visitors were sitting, standing, hanging by the door. A man came out of Barrister Chima's office, dragging a walking stick. He adjusted his glasses and made for the reception. Amara went into the office and returned seconds later. "Barrister Chima will see you now," she told Ogadinma. Her skirt had ridden higher up her thighs. The barrister was seated behind the desk, his head bent over a sheaf of papers, the room chilled to freezing point, the shelves cluttered with law books. "Good morning, sir," Ogadinma said, and stood waiting for the invitation to sit. He lifted his head, a man not much older than her father, but with features so striking it was as though his face was chiseled out of fine wood, his skin the color of roasted groundnut husk. He waved her over to the only chair from across his desk. and held her gaze with eyes that made her forget how to speak, how to move. She became conscious of her outfit, the loose skirt that stopped at her ankles, her cornrows that were old and fuzzy. Her heart was cutting hard. "Good morning, sir," she said, folding her hands on her lap. She could not hold his gaze, and so she stared at his spot on his chest. "How old are you?" he said. "I am 17, she replied. "You don't look 17 at all." She waited for him to say how old she looked. He didn't. Instead, he went on to ask questions about her visit. Who sent her? Who her father was? "I have never met him," he said, his tone dismissive. "I don't know how he got my card." He was speaking too fast. Ogadinma wanted to explain that her father got the contact through a customer who spoke highly of Barrister Chima, but the words were clogged in her throat. He was talking too fast. He was in a haste to send her on her way, or he was orchestrating this to make her miserable. She moved closer to the edge of her chair, her hands held out, and when she spoke, she could barely hear herself. "Help me, please. I don't want to stay at home for another 1 year doing nothing," she said, her hands still bunched together. "Please help me, sir." He was looking at her, his eyes unblinking. Ogadinma lowered her gaze, dug her fingernails into her palms. There was a knock, and then the door opened. Amara looked in, passed a curious glance at her before turning to her boss. "Madam Afwecheta is here. I have told her to wait. She is crying," Amara said. Barrister Chima nodded and Amara left. When he spoke again, his words were slower. "I am going to attend to a desperate client. Will you come back by 3 so we can talk about this admission you seek?" She was bobbing her head even before he was done speaking. "Yes, sir, I will come back by 3. Thank you so much, sir." But he had returned to the sheaf of papers, her cue to leave. She thanked him again, furiously. When she walked into the hot waiting room, she was so giddy she almost stumbled, and she was able to breathe again. Thank you. So I'll pause here for Ogadinma and then read this response, this poem, narrative poem, almost like a story I wrote for Rattle magazine. It was published part of their tribute to African poets. It's called Slot. Slot 1. Grandmother said there is a slot trapped in every woman, a wild taboo that must never be set free. So mother dipped her finger in a tub of pomade and massaged her daughter's clitoris until the puny thing grew thinner and disappeared into the fold of skin. Ugunwanyi budia, imekwenu mani, ugunwanyi budia. She packed up her books, took his name, and became dignified. Perhaps in the next life, she will come as a man. Perhaps she should make best of this body. So she made her husband a pot of soup and prepared a table for him to eat. She laid back and watched him eat. And though his face was riddled with pleasure, she did not know the taste of her own food. I stood under a shower, my breast drooping closer to my stomach, and I thought, oh, you sad things, it's too early to fall asleep. There was a masseuse who lived down the street. Her fingers were sleek and long, body thin and shapely. One day I stretched on the bed and let her hands walk my nerves, her fingers easing my knotted tension. My slot stirred and I bit my tongue until I tasted my own blood. Tell me how to make you happy, he said. Here, take my hands, speak with them. I don't know what happy is, I said. What does it taste like? Like the guava after the rains had washed the threes of Hamatan dust? Or the onubu soup after Mama had added dollops of ogiri? Did I tell you about the girl who took a hammer to my slot cage and caused everything to fall apart? Sex had always been a ceremony for the man's orgasm. My hands were just tools to stir my husband's eagerness, my body's his to devour. He would hover above me, face stretched in taut lines, sweat breaking from the sides of his temples, and I would think, Oh, how beautiful it is for this giant to quiver above me like an okra in the branch, like an okra branch in the winds. And when he collapsed on my chest, I would hold him and think I had fulfilled my purpose. Because what else was the purpose of the woman than to keep her man satiated? Until Nneka, wild one with a body that tapered like a Coke bottle and limbs that stretched from heavens to earth. Nneka with a mouth that spat words like hot corns, her head filled with sin. She gazed at my cage, shook her head at my slot and said, "Chai, who did this to you?" Then she picked at my locks, tantric fingers exposed in the other way of freedom, and I have never been the same again. Grandmother looked at her daughter and said, "This one is spoiled." Mother shook her head and said, "Her chi succumbed to slumber and this happened." Daughter strutted away, a proud slut. My husband used to joke about how docile I was before I joined the choir. One day he paused between thrusts to trap my moans with the flat of his palm. "Who are you?" he asked. "I have never seen you like this before." I bit his hand, threw my head back, forced him down, and he disappeared between my thighs. He has yet to emerge ever since. So that is the poem. So the next part I will read from Ogadinma is from chapter 2. After tragedy had struck and Ogadinma's father took a drastic action that caused everything to unravel in her journey and forced her into a path that shaped into who she became at the end of the story. So 2. Her father shook her awake past midnight. Hold on. Okay, I'll read from 34. Neighbors woke her with the usual cacophony of her childhood. Pots and spoons banging in out kitchens, pestles pounding into mothers, small children batting on the ledge in front of the compound, splashing water all over the floor. As a child, she had bathed outside too. On some days, it was Auntie Okwi who supervised her birth. Ogadinma had hated it. Auntie Okwi would sponge her until she was a frothy mass of white bubbles before rinsing off the lather with bowls of water. And when the soap burned her eyes, Auntie Okwi would smack her over the head, bah, bah, while Ogadinma danced in pain. "Who asked you to open your eyes?" Auntie Okwi would ask her. "Don't you have sense?" before obliging her a soothing splash of water. Her father was careful with the sponge when he helped out, and he was easy on the soap. He would scrub her upper body, hand her the sponge and say, "Ngwa, wash your bum bum," and she would sponge her buttocks and the space between her legs before he poured bowls of water to rinse off the lather. Now she huddled by the window, crouched on all fours because she could not sit yet. Her buttocks were riddled with welts and had burned when she washed herself that morning. She wondered if Auntie Okwi had felt the same kind of pain years ago after she got pregnant. Ogadinma still remembered that night. Auntie Okwi, thin and small and hovering by the door, her belly elevated to a strange roundness that made her look like she had stuffed a limp ball under her dress. She had told Ogadinma's father that she didn't know the man who got her pregnant. Ogadinma remembered how her father had dragged Auntie Okwi into the room and locked the door. She remembered Auntie Okwi's shrieks, the zipping sound of the rattan canes. After her father was done, he locked Auntie Okwi inside her room and shipped her off to their hometown the next morning. The last time she saw Auntie Okwi was in Onitsha after her hasty wedding to an old widower. "Are you ready?" her father's voice broke into her thoughts. Ogadinma jerked away from the window. "Yes, sir," she said, and caught herself. She had never called her father sir. "Let's go," her father said, his voice oddly piercing. She carried her bag and he followed behind. She heard the click of the door and then the turn of the keys. She kept walking, never looking back or slowing her pace, and he stayed behind her too. They did not speak. The previous years, when they traveled to their village in Abagana for Christmas, they would hold hands and he would take the window seat so she could watch the trees and the houses blending into each other, flitting past. Those times she looked forward to traveling, to sitting for 12 hours on the bus with her father. But it was different this time. About the abortion and the punishment he meted out last night, he said nothing. It was as though all of that had never happened. At the bus park, she hovered behind as he got the ticket from the counter, then waited, neither saying anything to the other until her bus was ready to leave. You will stop at Jibo, her father said. Don't get down at Burger or any other place. I have also told the driver this. Your final destination is Jibo. Do you hear me? Yes, Papa, I will get down at Jibo. There was a restlessness about him. He quickly pulled her to his chest and wrapped his arm around her. She rested her head against his chest and wondered if his stomach was knotted with tension as hers was. It was the first time in their lives that she would be traveling without him by her side. He broke the hug and pulled away. Safe journey, he said stiffly. Thank you, Papa, she said. In the bus, she looked out to catch a last glimpse of him. She did not see him. The morning breeze pushed against the blinds when they arrived in Lagos. She woke to the frantic voices outside her window, wheelbarrow pushers offering to carry her luggage, taxi drivers pounding passengers, young boys in stained clothes begging to lock bags on their heads, hawkers plastering their wares against the window. Jibowu was cramped, the floor stained black as though someone had spilled a tank of grease on it. Her buttocks were satisfyingly numb, but 1,000 pins of pain shot up her body when she stood up, the welts coming alive again. She got down from the bus, clutching her Ghana Must-Go bag. Men grabbed her, boys rounded her up, all of them offering their services. Someone called out her name. She turned and saw Nana, Uncle Ugunna's son. She had last seen him 2 years ago when they traveled to their village for Christmas. But he looked slightly different now, even taller. Ogadinma, you are here, he said. She still remembered his goofy laugh, how the dimples sank in when he laughed. She hastened toward him, even though she felt a throbbing pain all over her body. Nana, you haven't changed one bit, she forced brightness into her voice. He clasped her in his arms and held her tightly against his bony frame, laughing. He smelled of imperial leather soap. The hustlers, seeing this was bad market, broke away to hound another passenger. Nana said his father was parked across the road. He took her bag in one hand and held her with the other, and they made a dash across the busy road, narrowly missing a taxi that swerved dangerously in front of them. Uncle Ugonna's Peugeot 505 was shiny and black. His face broke into a brilliant smile as he threw his hands open and wrapped them around her, swaying from side to side. Bia, Ogadinma, you have grown so tall, like yam tendrils during the rains. Neke, neke, he said. He pulled away and tilted his neck dramatically to look at her face. Ifukwa obele nwanya, now I have to crane to look at you. He was smiling. For a moment, she was staring at a happier, shorter version of her father. His face was not stretched thin with worry, and he had eyes that danced with mischief and laughter. She grinned and did not say anything else after they got into the car. They drove into dense traffic, squeezing between yellow buses, fought for space with taxi drivers, and rode on pavement to beat hold-ups. She listened as they made small talk about the state of the roads, about the corrupt government, how Nigerians were still enduring epileptic power supply. Mostly, Nana did the talking, and Uncle Ugonna responded in the affirmative. She watched the ease with which they conversed, her chest suddenly tight. She thought of her father and their empty apartment, how the rooms would be silent now, how he would have breakfast and dinner all by himself. Would he watch NTA news? Would he still laugh when New Masquerade came on? We are entering Victoria Island, Nana said later. She pulled away from the window and grinned at him. He frowned, then whispered, "Why are you crying?" She swiped at her face and felt wetness. Then she turned away and mumbled something about being tired. But Uncle Ugonna was already looking back. His gaze darting between her and the road, a knowing look in his eyes, and for a moment she feared her father had told him everything that happened. But Uncle Ugonna said, "Your father misses you. He called me 10 times this morning asking if I already picked you up." "He did?" "Yes, so he refused to let me sleep." He laughed. Ogadinma laughed too, nervously. Nana rubbed her shoulder. Something lifted from her chest. Her father missed her. She wanted to believe it. She shut her eyes and tried to imagine his face, his laughter, but all she remembered was the cold look, how distant he was when they walked to the motor park. Her chest felt tight again, but she took a deep breath and tried to chase the sad thoughts away. They reached Victoria Island. The cars here were sleeker. Glassy buildings sprang from among dull ones on dusty streets, reaching for the sky. She knew that when people said that Lagos was the New York of Nigeria, they were speaking in the metaphorical sense, because the Lagos and the New York she saw on TV did not look alike in any way. But she pressed her face against the window and breathed in the air that smelled of dust and sweat, and imagined she had flown out and was now driving down the street of Manhattan. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Hey, so I will let everyone know, if you'd like to ask a question, you'd like just me to ask the question on your behalf, you can just write it in the chat or put it in the Q&A. But if you would like to kind of come up on the stage here and ask your question, just use that raise hand emoji should be at the bottom of your screen. So if you hit the raise hand, I'll know to bring you up here so you can ask your question in person. But I just wanted to start with just one thing. You had mentioned right at the beginning here that Ogadinma is about your mother's generation, or someone from your mother's generation. But I was wondering if you could, because this came up before that we began, could you talk a little bit about what compelled you to write about that experience?
Yeah. A few years ago, before I wrote this book in the idea came in 2016. I was on Twitter and I saw, we're having this really heated conversation with on Twitter, on Nigerian Twitter. And then this young man said something that struck me as really odd. He said that the young women of today, that we are very impatient, that we were easily walking away from marriage, that our mother's generation did not walk away, that they stayed in their marriage, they persevered, they endured, and they made their marriage work. And that was odd to me. And that showed me the way we sweep so many stories under the table, especially stories that we don't talk about. I mean, we wrap too many things in silence. We don't talk about it because we are not encouraged to talk about it. We often talk about marriage in the good light. We talk about how to make marriage work. And even in the church, you're encouraged to make your marriage work. And if things are going awry, the woman is always blamed. She's not doing something right. Maybe she's not sexually satisfying her husband properly. That's why he's philandering. If he hits her, she must have done something wrong. So we often have, even when I was still, a baby, a child, 5 years old, 10, 11, 15. The first time I witnessed a seminar in my church was this huge conversation about what the woman should do to make the marriage work. So, and then of course, once I had a conversation with an aunt who told me that it took her 10 good years before she could like her husband, not love, like him, 10 years. And then she married when she was 16. My mom married when she was 16 too. Her sisters married when they were 15, 16, 17. I think the oldest among them married when she was 20. And then she was even being called an old maiden. And I too, my own generation, when I was like 15 years old, I already had suitors knocking on my dad's door, asking for my hand. I was 15 years old. So it's a whole different conversation. But the point I wanted to make was, in response to that tweet I saw, because it really offended me, and it made me realize the kind of stories we aren't telling, or the kind of story we like to wrap in silence. So I had to go back to think about my aunt, my community, and the way we raise girls, the way we encourage them to get married. I mean, it's a different conversation, but my point with Ogadinma was to write a tribute to my mother's generation, to retell their story. Ogadinma is couched in their reality. My mother and her sisters, the women in my community, they mostly married when they were in their teens, in the late 70s to the early 80s. My mom married in 1981. I was born in 1982. So what I did with Ogadinma was to chronicle their journey, to document this journey, because most of them were true. I mean, I have an aunt who abandoned her 5 children. The last baby was like 3 months old. She walked away in the middle of the night and she never looked back. So they found her 20 years later. And for most of those women who walked away, we don't talk about them, I mean, publicly. It's a family shame. It's wrapped in silence. You know, it's something that you don't speak in the public, so you don't bring more disgrace to the family. But with Ogadinma walked away from her marriage. That's me telling that, it's saying that we had women who walked away. We had women who could not stay. We had women also who endured, and it took them 10 years to like their husband, not to love him. We had women who immediately fell in love with their husbands and their marriage were quite successful. We had those whose marriages were, the marriage were so violent that the women could not stay and they left. We had those who endured. So this is a response. This is me paying tribute to that generation. This is me documenting that story. And now I must say that this story really frustrated me. Writing the story, like, it frustrated the hell out of me. I would never go through what Ogadinma went through. I mean, 1 over 100 of it, I would not. At the point in the story, I wanted to like grab her and shake her and ask her, what the hell are you still doing there? I mean, she endured for 2 years. We had women who endured for 37 years, 40 years before they called it quits. So yeah, it's a very painful, I mean, trigger warning. There's so much trauma in the story, but it's couched in reality, and it's a tribute to my mother's generation. And also, it's important to note this too, that it doesn't matter if the story is set in the 80s Nigeria. It is still true today. It's still, yes, many women are still going through that, and it's important for us to talk about this, because if we don't talk about it, we will not know what we are doing wrong in our community, and we will not correct that wrong.
And I was really struck how that character of how you don't look away from the traumatic incidents, but also it's not foretold what will be the response to that. It does seem to me it's very interesting how she does respond, as you were noting. So yeah. And you touch upon this a little bit, but there was a question from someone in the audience, admiring both the intimate way you write in the novel and then in responding. But wondering whether you do see some changes in either direction now, particularly in Nigeria, for the status of women.
Yeah, I think I have to give credit to social media. Social media gave people the opportunity to talk, to come online and even to converge online. There is this Facebook group that I belong in. It's on Facebook. We have over 1 million Nigerian women in that group, and it's a closed community. The kind of conversations we have there, we don't have that. I mean, in our own physical community, we don't do that, because it's almost like there are taboos. You're not allowed to talk about that. One of the recent conversations I started having, because those who have read my nonfiction will know that I talk a lot about postpartum depression and postpartum complications. I mean, that's topic. I mean, domestic violence there's so much silence, but then there's a layer to that silence, and that's with postpartum depression and postpartum complication. I mean, you don't talk about it. You should be perfect for your husband. You should not deny him sex, But then with postpartum complication, it added a layer to the conversation. And what we are doing today is, with social media, we're able to converge online. We started in small communities talking to each other about our experiences, exchanging stories, exchanging notes. Many of us come from some are located in southwestern Nigeria, where the culture is different from southeastern Nigeria. I grew up in northern Nigeria. I was raised there, but my hometown, I'm originally from southeastern Nigeria. So with those communities on social media, we're able to converge without the men, without the men policing the conversation as we would, as it's typical in our communities. So we don't have people policing those conversations. And then on social media, without that policing, with that freedom, so social media gave us, we're able to talk about that. So the changes you see today, it's not as if we have monumental changes. We don't have monumental, but what we have is the ability to talk, the ability to speak without anybody shushing you. Usually you couldn't even possibly publish a story in the newspapers. You have to go through different gatekeepers to have your story published, and they have to tailor it according to what they want, but then on social media, nobody tells you how to tell your story. So that's the major change we have. And it encouraged the new feminists. I mean, we had feminist thoughts in all of our survival stories in the past, but now most women are coming to the full realization that it is okay to be selfish. It is okay to put yourself first. It's okay to put your mental health first. I mean, I always say it, when you board a flight and the flight attendant is giving those instructions, they will tell you in case of crisis, you put on the mask yourself first. You take care of yourself before you take care of the next person. So if you don't put your mental health first, if you don't take care of you first, how then will you be able to be of a support system to your children, to your community, to your family? So that's what social media is doing. It gave us the opportunity to think of ourselves, to put ourselves, because one thing that happens is that you're expected to put your husband's needs, your husband, his needs, your children, their needs, your husband's family, their needs, his community. I mean, the ladder keeps, it continues until you get to you. But with social media, it's like, this is me. It's okay to be narcissist, to be selfish, to think about you first. So you're talking about you. So that's what social media did for us, and also gave us opportunity to converge from smaller groups to large groups, to women coming forward to tell their stories. And it's marvelous what's happening now.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that when the group was discussing yesterday, it was something that came up that, she doesn't, Ogadinma in the beginning of that book really doesn't have anyone she can turn to with questions. And, and that seems to be, that is a real loss that she has. And it sounds like you're saying there are some mitigating factors now.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's another story from the audience. Wondering, the question was, what do you think would have happened if Ogadinma had given birth to a daughter?
It would have complicated her story. And I have to be honest, I was deliberate in the gender of the child, the sex of the child. I had to make him a boy, because if she gives birth to a boy, if she leaves that boy, it doesn't matter what happens. Nobody asks what happened to the boy's mother. I mean, the boy he's privileged already in the society. But then with the girl, there are so many things that happen. The complication here is that, and she comes of age and a man knocks on the door. That's what they usually do. They knock on the door to declare their interest. A man knocks on the door. What his family usually does is to ask about the girl's mother, to know if she is the virtuous woman, if she was a good woman, because if the mother was a good woman, it means that Ogadinma and the girl will also be good to the man, to the husband. In Ogadinma's case, she was lucky because she was exiled to Lagos, a different community, southwestern Nigeria. That was where she met her husband, But then within her own community, she had to give birth to that boy so that when she lives, she wouldn't be burdened. Because most things that happen in our communities, when the woman can no longer endure trauma or violence, she thinks about her children. It makes it difficult. Children complicates a lot of things. So if she lives, what happens to the children? And also in my community where the child belongs or the children belong to the man, you can't just easily go to the court and file for, there are so many women are already doing that. But then in the past, you just don't go to the court and file for, custody of the child. You have to go through customary laws, and it's so complicated. So to not go through all that complication, I had to give her a son. But if she had given birth to a daughter, it would have completed the story. I don't even know if I would be able to complete it because of the whole layers of the system, the process she had to go through to be able to leave, and also the what it means also, she will not be able to put herself first. She will have to think about that girl child. But since I wanted her to think about herself, to put herself first, I had to give her a boy, so to make her living easier for her. Yeah, that was also a very selfish move from my part too. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you had said that this was a book that you had to really write before you could write other things. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you've been working on since. Now, though I know the book has just come out this month, so it's still the new book. But
I'm working on two things. I didn't know that I could write it, but I am writing the story of a Nigerian woman in the United States. So that's all I can say about it. So it's me navigating two cultures here. So you have her own Southeastern Igbo community, the cultural heritage she brings to the United States, and then the cultural burden, the cultural gap she has to navigate to be able to assimilate, into the American society. A bit of my experience I came to the United States for the first time in 2016 in Iowa, and it was very difficult. But then also something that I enjoyed, and I think it was an immense privilege for me, was moving away from home gave me a new perspective, and now I have the outsider's perspective to be able to look back to see the things we do amazingly well, the things that we need to improve on, to be able to interrogate my experience at home, and then to pair that sort of a comparative analysis of my own experience at home and my own experience as a woman, as a Black woman in the United States. I didn't used to call myself a Black woman. In Nigeria, nobody calls me Black. I'm just an Igbo woman in Nigeria. But in the United States, I had to co-opt a new identity, to be able to navigate all those identities. That's what I'm trying to explore in my new project. The second one is, it's going to take me a longer time to do it, but I'm gathering research, has to do with my community's complicity in the transatlantic slave trade. So it's going to take me quite some time to complete that project.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Yes, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So we had someone who wanted to ask a question on the panel. I will bring John Oiwale up, I believe. See if this works. Oh, good. And you could just unmute or insert your video, and then you should be able to ask a question.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, this is Lighthouse here. Ukamaka, thank you.
John, hi.
Yeah, I'm very well. I had to make sure to get up. It's almost 2 a.m. here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, really. And thank you for all your help. And well, unfortunately, I haven't read Ogadinma yet, but I had been meaning to ask you this question, especially when you were having the other reading at the very first one, which we talked about the other time, which I missed. Yeah. I remember saying to you in an email that I had read that essay, the long reads essay, and I find that you kind of write in a visceral way. I guess the last person I've read who writes like that would be Lola Shunay, So I wanted to ask you, how do you write? What's I don't know how to put it now, the role of pain, you understand? I can almost see the pain leaping out of the pages, so I don't, how do you do that? Because it's it's very alive, but it's also very I can just feel it, it's so not artificial at all. So yeah.
Thank you, John. So the essay he was talking about is the nonfiction piece I wrote for Long Reads, where I talked about my postpartum depression and postpartum complication. John, to be able to write that, it took me 12 years to be able to tell that story. So
Wow.
there's something distance does with the way I tell the story. When I was experiencing that, I couldn't possibly talk about it and I couldn't possibly write it. And if I had attempted writing it, then I would mess it up. You would only see me ranting because I was in severe pain. But then with the distance I put between myself and that experience allowed me to make bullet points of the losses in those experiences, the joy, the pain, the feeling, the images, to be able to stitch those ideas, those feelings, to even name the feeling. Distance allowed me to do that, to be able to write that, to think back and also to edit myself, to revise what I'm to think, but also to be true to my own experience. But something also happens with distance. You begin to question your own story. Did it really happen here? Did it really happen in this way? So, but that's what distance did for me. I have come to embrace that. If I am experiencing something today, like I hope to write about my reaction to the US election and what it meant for me, an international student in the United States, and the trauma I had to go through, you know, with the whole visa issues, immigration laws under the Trump administration. So I started working on that. But what I have so far is just me ranting. But give me 5 years, I will be able to. I would have been able to get to have matured. You know, I would have been able to note the things that are important, and also to be able to include joy. That's what is important to me. Not just to have an entire story filled with trauma, but also to have notes of joy, to have other things, you know, woven into this narrative. So that's what happens with distance. I can't emphasize this less. Distance really helped with my nonfiction to separate me from my trauma, to give me a different perspective, so that when I write it, it pulses on the page. That was a high compliment. Thank you so much, John.
Absolutely, you deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, John.
Yeah, thank you.
So we are coming to the end of our time, and I have a couple questions that people have asked on the chat, but one of them might be a spoiler. So Stacy, I will get an answer from Uka about your question, but when we're all done. So I think the last question someone had just asked, Emma writes that you read so beautifully and gracefully. Thank you for sharing this with us. What inspired you to lead a career as a writer and author?
Oh, I don't even know what inspired me to lead a career as a writer. Maybe it's just me wanting to live. Maybe just me wanting to do something different. I mean, I married when I was 19 years old, had my 3 children. And then at a point, I wanted something more than just being a mother. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy being a mother. Today, my daughter moved into the dormitory. She's now in university, my first child. She's going to be 19. So I feel like it's happening in a dream. I'm still processing that feeling. But then I wanted more out of life, and also because I always had a flair for language and also loved language. So after having my children and then working in a bank, I wanted more. Maybe it's me being selfish. Maybe it's me also being too ambitious. Like the accusation, you know, most usual typical accusation. The way we accuse women in my community who are too ambitious, who left their husbands, or women who, I mean, I left my family there in Nigeria and I'm in the United States pursuing a career, and also pursuing a PhD in English. Is that I'm too ambitious. Maybe it's my ambitiousness that propels me and encourages me to become to pursue this career in writing and also in academia. So it's ambitiousness, and also it's a bit of selfishness.
All channeled in a good direction. Well,
yeah, thank you.
Luca, I want to thank you so much. It's been a really great reading. I want to thank everyone that came out tonight, and particularly to Rifat for the introduction. Please do try, we're right at about an hour, so please do try, if you can, to come next month. We will be trying to do a live outdoor event and Zoom casting it. I think we can do both, but we'll see. Thanks once again. And Uka, if you can just stick around, because I have one more question that we need to answer, but it's spoilers for people that haven't read the book yet. So
Thank
care,
you
everyone.
so much, everyone. Thank you.
All right, so this is the question. I don't know if you can see it on the on the Q&A, and it is a good question. Did the black potion that Ogadinma gave her husband to humble him, is that what made him sick with that illness, the mystery illness that he had?
Yes, it's what made him sick and ill. I mean, sincerely, I have to be honest. I wanted to kill that man. I wanted to kill him. So I couldn't resist it. But then, well, eventually he didn't die, because in reality, such vile men, they even thrive, they become successful, they succeed, they succeed. So he had to leave to pay, to be true to reality, especially in my community. So, but that was me trying to kill him, trying to murder him. So the potion humbled him. It gave him the kidney disease, and he became bloated and very, very, very ill toward the end of the book. Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. All right. We wanted to have that answered, but I didn't want to spoil it for people that might be hanging out. So,
Stacey asked another question. What happened to her after the book? Where did she go? Stacey, I am considering writing a sequel to Ogadinma, but this time it possibly could be from the son's perspective. So yeah, so I would want to have the son think about the mother's action and how that shaped him. Yeah, to also, because also me, I want to talk about how patriarchy hurts men, and also how it hurts even boys. We don't talk about that so much. We also mostly talk about how it hurts women. So I want to talk about how it hurts men too. So that's why I'm considering writing from the boy's perspective. So maybe that will take me a year or 2 or 3 to be able to accomplish that project. So then we'll know where she went to after that.
all right. Well, thank you again. This has been a really great night. I really appreciate that you're up for this, even though I contacted you out of the blue. It's been a really, really good experience for everybody. So.
Thank you, Rifat. Thank you, Jen.
Okay.
Thank you, Stacey, and everyone. Sherry. Yeah. Okay. Bye.
All right. Take care. Have a good night, everyone.
You too. Bye.